either, you know, help us keep the rates low, or make a commitment that whatever they collect is going to go toward increased connectivity in our communities.
You know, as a former mayor and council member, I would just respond to that by saying that when an elected leader comes up and says, we're going to be using these funds for municipal services, I would not presume that they're somehow going to be used for some nefarious purpose.
No.
You, as our former local
say
government official, well, you didn't say that, but you do imply that they're not going to use them for the benefit of the public through at least rollout of telecommunications.
They said police and fire specifically,
which are community priorities, but I don't think, you know, every community is going to use it in those places. But these are all, you know, local government folks have to prioritize what they use funds for, and as you know, as a former local elected, they are frequently harder and harder to come by, and things are only getting more and more expensive. So, you know, we have to allow some leeway to local governments to decide how to best allocate funds on behalf of their local residents. And in this case, and I'll just conclude my comments here, I just continue to have concerns that the formulas that are being utilized here need to be improved. And I wish there was more time to do that. I think it would be better if this were on a 2-year pathway. I'm going to lay off on the bill today, but I just think there are some remaining issues here. And as others have observed, I think that piece around disadvantaged communities is one that's extremely important for us to address in a way that assures that the rollout of future technologies is going to benefit all Californians. And I don't see that in the bill right now. Thank you.
Mr. Grayson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify one more time as we move forward in just a quick series of questions, just to clarify one more time, under this bill, is the city prohibited from negotiations?
No. No.
Okay. If that's the case, then we go to some discussion that has already taken place concerning language, quote unquote, feasible design and co-location, which can be a bit ambiguous. So actually, who is the one that decides what's feasible and as far as design-wise and co-location?
There's going to be a public process to decide that as the cities come up with their design guidelines. I'm sure the telecommunication industry will be at the table to weigh in terms of what that is.
So are you suggesting then that it's incumbent upon the local agencies to, prior to any application that would come in, to hold public meetings that would decide what are acceptable designs and what feasible would mean for that local agency?
I think that's the best process to determine that, especially when there is an application and you do have the actual equipment showcased in front of you, saying this is what we're going to install, and they have an opportunity to see that and to look at how what the requirements of installation are going to be, what the connection requirements, energy requirements, and what their poles are like. I mean, we don't know. California is a very diverse state. I mean, if you go from San Francisco to Solvang to El Centro, I mean, everybody has different design guidelines, community plans, and public infrastructure.
Okay, so it was said from an opponent that the industry would pretty much be able to go into a local municipality and be virtually unregulated, in which a city would not have discretion over where and how. But you're suggesting, or actually stating under this bill, that a city clearly retains the ability to say no to locations?
It's all in the bill. I mean, it's on the language here. I mean, there's plenty of information here.
This is the time, place, and manner. Time, place, and manner.
Page 5, line 7.
Okay. A city or county may require that a small cell be approved pursuant.
Could you locate that in the bill?
Yes, page 5, line item 5. Line item 4. A city or county may require that the small cell be approved pursuant to a building permit or its functional equivalent in connection with placement outside the public rights of way, or an encroachment permit or its functional equivalent use consistent with sections 7901 and and 7901.1 of the Public Utilities Code for the placement in public rights-of-way and any additional ministerial permits, provided that all permits are issued within the timeframes required by state and federal law. And then it goes on to, give kind of a whole page of conditions that is a regulatory framework. It's
So
not,
would a city be
it's
able
not an
to-
absence of rules.
So would a city or county or local municipality be able to then enter into, for instance, an MLA, a master license agreement with a telecom
Yes.
company? Or if both parties agreed possibly to even veer away from what this bill is calling for and actually enter into their own contractual agreement and negotiate their whole package without
Precisely.
even working with this bill?
Precisely.
So you're saying, if I understand it correctly, that if a local municipality wanted to, they could actually, with the wireless company that has come to their city, they could actually enter into an agreement similar to or in like manner that Sacramento did.
Yes.
And that this bill does not prohibit that. That's right.
That's right.
Opposition?
Thank you, Assemblymember Grayson, for allowing me to respond. Unfortunately, on page 5, line 38, there's an explicit prohibition on in-kind contributions for small cell wireless permitting. And so the deal, in theory, I guess the wireless industry could potentially volunteer such in-kind contributions. Unfortunately, a city would not be able to require, as part of their negotiations, such in-kind contributions for data backhaul, data access for their local police and fire libraries that some cities have provided, or their public parks, as you may have seen that the city of Sacramento was able to negotiate.
Okay.
And if I
Senator.
could just point you to page 8, line item 13, and this gives the cities the right. This subdivision does not prohibit a wireless service provider and a city or county from mutually agreeing to an administrative permit fee or attachment rate that is less than the fees, or different than the attachment rate that is established above. I mean, wait a minute. To an annual, wait a minute, from mutually, since it's all scribbled in, I can't read your writing. Okay, this is better.
It's true.
Let me read this, reread this. I'm sorry about that. This subdivision does not prohibit a wireless service provider and a city or county from mutually agreeing to an annual administrative permit fee or attachment rate that is different than the fees or rates established above.
That was a committee amendment.
That was a committee amendment.
Okay. So, thank you, committee chair.
You're welcome.
All right. So, having seen this, then it would be possible. Is there a need for clarification from opposition? Would there be a need for clarification to make sure that the two from page 8 to page 5, that there's clarity between what can be required, what can't be required, and then page 8 where what can be entered into and what is prohibited? Is there a need for clarification there?
Sure. Thank you for, again, the chance to respond. So, I mean, striking out that language from 38 beyond, as it refers to in-kind contributions, would be a start, because that's a direct prohibition on in-kind contributions, unless the wireless company were to mutually agree to something less. I mean, they could agree to providing in-kind contributions and rates less than the $250 that's spelled out in the bill, but only if they mutually agree to that. So a city can't. Again, this would have to be under a mutual agreement.
So I'm actually headed somewhere here.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience, Chair. But I'm actually headed somewhere here. So let's go back to the fee, the $250, in addition to the recovery of expenses. So the city is able to recover expenses, and then they get an additional $250 on top of that. First of all, the $250. How many other states have something similar to this bill?
Assemblyman Grayson, there have been 11 states that have passed legislation, 10 signed, similar to this. This fee would be fairly significantly more than in any other state, the cost recovery plus the fee. is considerably more than than any other state.
So would it make us the highest?
Yes.
All right. So if that was the case, and I would turn back to, so glad to have the League of Cities up here. Have you heard, because I know that there's some cities that have, let's say, for instance, they're talking about, or the proponents are talking about putting these boxes on light standards. There are some cities that have lighting districts that actually assess fees or tax. And so something that was said in opposition was that the taxpayer will be subsidizing telecom companies for this. But when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, wait a minute, if they're getting cost recovery, the city's getting cost recovery, and then now they're getting an additional $250 off of something they were getting absolutely nothing for outside of the only source of revenue, which was a fee or a tax on the resident of that particular lighting district. Have you found any indication by any of the local municipalities that they would actually give that tax relief back to the citizen? So that, I mean, if that pole is being now paid for by a private industry, and they're now getting more than what the cost of that pole is to maintain annually, has there been any indication that local municipalities would then, before putting that money into the general account, that they would actually return some money back to, or give relief back to taxpayers of a special lighting district?
Sure. So the lease revenues that cities generate from small cell antennas or leases of other public property are deposited into city and county general funds, and they're flexible dollars, so they could be used for any essential public service, whether it's police, fire, parks, libraries, et cetera. And that's the return of the public benefit. You're correct in your conclusion that it's not a true subsidy in the sense that wireless companies will have essentially reduced cost access to public infrastructure that are now currently subject to market rate leases. This would no longer be a market rate lease, so it would be essentially a discount to the wireless companies. And there is no requirement in this bill to return those cost savings to the consumer. So in that sense, you're correct. There is no, it's not a true subsidy in terms of that cost savings not being passed on to the subscribers who are receiving a private benefit from the wireless company that they subscribe to. And so for local governments, you're also correct. It's not a subsidy in the sense that we return money as a tax credit to our constituents or our residents, but we return that in the form of a public benefit in terms of paying for our services or for our infrastructure.
Right. Okay, so if the bill did not exist and we weren't here today, a lot of people would be very happy. But if we weren't sitting in this room at 4:08 p.m. On this beautiful day outside, and things were as they currently exist, where certain cities are charging or asking for $3,000 market value, a $3,000 fee per pole, or upwards to $15,000. So this bill didn't exist yet. That doesn't change the fixed budget of the infrastructure from the telecom companies of $2 billion plus to roll out technology to cover the cities. Who then gets the coverage? If it's going to cost this much in one city, this much in another city, who ends up with the coverage and who ends up with nothing?
You know, there is a distinction here that these are private companies investing their own private dollars, and they're taking a risk, and none of our government funds are going into this program.
Okay.
So they will be making their investment based on accessing their clientele wherever they're going to be located.
Right.
And I suspect that's, in business, I used to run a business for 10 years, so I can speak to, how you can do business and stay in business. But so, you want to turn a profit, right? And you can't expend more money than the cost of doing business, or else you'll basically go out of business. So, they're gonna go out there and assess where it's feasible to provide the service and what, in terms of what people are willing to pay.
Senator, if I may, just real quick, I'm more convinced and persuaded that the telecom companies, as you say, are going to turn to the profitable side, even if it means they have to pay exorbitant fees for that city. And it's going to be your urban or your rural and your underserved communities that are going to suffer the most. Now I'm going to make a couple of comments. I'm going to give it back to the chair.
Only if you make it so expensive.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's a couple of comments and then a statement before I give it back to the chair. It's incredibly disingenuous of industry to come out and promote that this is 5G technology when 5G technology is not even going to be available till 2020. To tell you the truth, just be truthful, be honest, and be upfront and say, this is 4G. We want to roll it out because this is how we're going to roll it out, because we believe that this is how the easiest transition is going to be for 5G when it comes. That would help tremendously. And on the other hand, it would be kind of nice and refreshing if cities would think more holistic about the state that they're in and would actually consider the fact that they're not the only entity in the entire state, and that when you begin to charge absolutely exorbitant fees, understand that you're doing it not at the expense of that company, because that company is going to pass those fees down to the taxpayer. And so, or to the ratepayer, I'm sorry. And that ratepayer is going to end up absorbing those fees. But the city makes off and they get off. Now, I understand the city, in many cases, the cities are still suffering and feeling the very sensitive bruises left from the dissolving of redevelopment. So possibly the state needs to own a little bit of where the cities are right now and how they're still feeling and why they're grappling to try to still cover the general funds that have disappeared at the state's expense. However, for the cities to go to a place where it's first come, first serve, and grab all I can get and leave others empty-handed is not really being good brothers, good sisters as far as cities working together in the state. It's put us in a position where we now have to consider something statewide that should have stayed on a local level. And so with that, what I would like to see, if this bill was to move forward, what I would like to see is there has to be some assurance on the rollout for equitable access for disadvantaged communities and for rural communities. If there is no equitability in that, then this is simply asking the legislator to step up and be a marketer and do your business for you as an industry. There has to be some assurance in that area. There must be some language clarification, as we brought out with the League of Cities here, as far as what's feasible in design and co-location. And then the fact of making sure, because there seems to be some question, I go back to my colleague as far as that sweet spot, and there's got to be some type of a spot where we can all land on where cities feel like they still have the leverage to negotiate, but that the industry and what they're looking for really is certainty, where the industry can come into the municipality with some sense of certainty, because right now the local municipality has all the leverage with the permit, and others sit. And I will tell you, I know firsthand, it takes 2 years to pull a permit for something of this sort. And so, having said that, I find it interesting that from 3 cities in my district, and I know that I have electeds that came here, and by the way, I did notice that when it came to the proponents that spoke in behalf, I noticed that we had public safety, medical, education, manufacturing. It went from small business to large businesses. It ranged from urban to rural. And then I also noticed that in the opposition, with the exception of a handful of voices, the one thing everyone had in common was they were coming from a governmental agency. I did have something that came from my district office, and that was from 3 of the cities in my district, 2 of them being the 2 largest cities. We had 8 communicate in opposition, and we had 805 constituents communicate in support. So I'll leave that out there. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Vopel.
Madam Chair, committee, I'm a child of the 1950s and 1960s, okay? And I remember that televisions were very large, radios were very large because of the vacuum tubes. And the companies in those days would try to shrink the vacuum tubes desperately to get these things down where you could get them in your house, etc. And then in 1962, transistors were invented, and the shrinkage was massive. I could hold a transistor radio in the palm of my hand. It was amazing. To me, it was an absolute miracle. My first cell phone took up 1/3 of the trunk of my car. Now I hold a cell phone here that's also a wonderful macro computer that brings everything in the world right to the palm of my hand again. This is the second time that I've gone through shrinkage. I call it technological shrinkage. I remember cell towers, the height of redwoods, and they've shrank down to Christmas trees now. And what we're seeing before us here is massive shrinkage from 4G to 5G, 6G, 7G, and so on. I'm looking at these devices. We're looking at technology today, but 10 years from now, who knows? We might be able to put them the size of a coffee cup. So I believe in my heart of hearts that this technology will give such a benefit to all the cities, counties, all of our jurisdictions. Because as we deploy these devices, there'll be hundreds and probably thousands of these devices at going rate and $250 a device. You can imagine how many "can you hear me nows" will be out there when this is deployed. Most technology starts in the urban areas and spreads out. It's kind of like an oil slick, okay? Truly is. And technology, and my Assembly Member Grayson is spot on. We have to make sure the technology spreads out to the urban areas and the underserved and the poor areas as soon as possible. And I believe that will happen naturally. So I'm kind of going on faith on that one. To finish up, this technology will continue to change the world. 5 years from now, when we're 5G deployed, we're going to have so many industries and so much wealth generated that we can't even imagine right now, although the millennials are already working on it, okay? That $250 a unit is not going to seem like much money at all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Ridley Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. To the proponents, I know there's a great deal of talk that's going on about the economic development benefit. Might you know how many towers you've had sited on a good year and small cells? Just because I think the number in the analysis is 30 to 50,000 industry-wide. I don't know if you have a perspective on California. What's a good year in terms of siting either small cells or towers or combined?
With the chair's permission, I can't tell you how many cell towers are statewide, but what I can say is that we're going to need a lot more small cells because of the spectrum quality. The spectrum does not propagate as far as a cell tower. So a cell tower might give you 5 to 10 miles radius of coverage, but the small cells for 4G LTE densification, which you're right, goes a few blocks. For 5G, the spectrum is going to be millimeter wave spectrum. That spectrum goes much shorter distances, maybe 100 feet, and requires a line of sight. So as you move, as Moore's Law happens, Assemblymember Vopel, and you go from the towers to the 4G LTE small cells to the 5G nodes, you're going to see them get smaller in dimension, and you're going to see them get many, many more. We're going to need about 5 to 10 times the number of 5G nodes as we will 4G LTE nodes. So it really is about P times Q, price times quantity. So this cost formula needs to pencil out in order to bring 5G to California.
So the nodes are substantially smaller. What size? Because I've seen photos and all that. What size are they? Do we know? Is it a couple of feet?
You mean the distance?
The nodes. When I say nodes, I mean for 5G.
With the chair's
5G
permission.
technology, yeah.
So the 5G nodes are currently being invented, to Assemblymember Grayson's point. We're in pre-trial commercial testing, and we've announced in 11 cities that we're doing that right now. We'll be doing that in the city of Sacramento in the second half of this year, if all goes well. And then we're in a desperate race to be the first to deploy 5G in our country. Those nodes are expected to be significantly smaller in size than the current 4G LTE small cells.
Got it. The reason I started this question is to get a sense of how much installation activity there would be in a normal course versus what would be anticipated for here. And the 30 to 50,000 number over 5 to 7 years is what the analysis suggests. So we would anticipate probably no more than 10,000 a year small cell installations. Is that kind of what we're thinking about?
Again.
This is the
just for downtown LA, Assemblymember Ridley Thomas. Verizon alone is going to need around 200 to 300 small cells just to densify for 4G LTE. Then you have to multiply that by 5 to 10 times for when we get to 5G.
Okay. Was there another response? Okay. A question that may be kind of simple for you all, but with respect to the liability associated with potential either health impacts or some other impacts safety impacts, that rests with the company, or does that shift to the city as a result of accepting that, or if we put in this process and making it, I'm not sure of the term, is it a ministerial permit versus a discretionary? Is that basically what we're doing here? Is that what this bill does?
I didn't understand the question.
So because if this bill is to pass, we would change the process. Does liability rest with the company that installs if there are safety issues, if for some reason something we don't think of that arises, or is that with the company?
There is nothing precluding the local municipal agency from enforcing all building code requirements.
Okay.
Public safety is extremely important. There are this doesn't exempt them from following, or the industry from following, the building code requirements. They are still in place. They must be followed. They have to pull the appropriate, if electricity is required, they have to pull an electrical permit, construction permit, and they have to conform to the codes that are imposed by the U.S. standards.
May I add an additional comment? Mr. Ridley Thomas, on page 4, line 38 of the bill, small cells must comply with all applicable federal, state, and local health and safety regulations, including the Federal Americans with Disability Act of 1990. So it reinforces that in the bill, and that was an amendment that was added in the Senate.
And liability would rest with the telecom carrier?
Yes.
Okay.